It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth, President and founder of Secure Estate Management. Take charge of your financial future with your personal bank. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to Your Personal Bank Show. Today, I want to talk about the fixed or the safer money buckets, if you will. You know, modern portfolio theory teaches us, we hear this all the time, that the, typical portfolio should be something like 60% equity, 40% bonds, or bond type equivalents, if you will. And the idea of the safer, the bond equivalent side is to create income or have more of a steady Eddie approach, not subject to market fluctuations so much. And that's, it's a way to diversify, of course, and spread risk. And given what's happened in the recent weeks and month or so, certainly that is important. If it wasn't important before, it wasn't on folks' radar, certainly I think it is now. And I want to refer to, and by the way, I know if some advice in terms of what to do if you're a business or individual and things like that, going into an economic downturn, perhaps a recession even, it's hard to say what's going to happen. It's too early to tell, but the possibility certainly exists. Certainly should plan for it with economic shutdowns, literally around the world. It's a factor that needs to be addressed. Listen to last week's show. Go to yourpersonalbank.com, and I highly recommend that you listen to the show from last week, and there'll be more information or more sharing on all that. But what I really want to talk about today is, when these economic downturns and these changes occur, overwhelmingly, article after article, advisor after advisor talks about, it's a good time to recalibrate your mix, your portfolio, because perfect example, a recent Vanguard study, 44,000 do-it-yourselfers showed that, the exposure to the equity side has kind of gotten out of whack to, what they may have intended or what's appropriate for their proximity to retirement. And like I said, on average, it showed that the average bond allocation was only 23%. As Steve Utkus, the director of Vanguard Center for Investor Research, stated, he goes, during the bull market, they just let the money run. Now, of course, over the past decade or so, that worked, for the most part. The markets were good. And if you had heavily in equities, it ran. And more of them, even if you started with the right allocation, because of the increase in value, that percentage changed. So, just about everybody recommends, hey, when we have a downturn or whatnot, great time to look at your allocation and reallocate accordingly. But then that brings us to another problem. The 40% bond side or bond-like stuff, again, it doesn't have to be bonds. It can be any financial tool that really accomplishes a couple of things in terms of, one, it needs to not be heavily reliant on the markets, in the economy, and it has to create some kind of income, return, interest, whatever, and to kind of fit into that bucket or that category. And in this article here, I referred to it last week. I want to dive into it further because it's so hard to find information on the safer money bucket side. I'm not sure the reason. I mean, it seems like folks are overly focused, particularly in Wall Street arenas, on stocks, equities, things like that. That's the more sexy, exciting side of things. Of course, the bond or bond-like equivalents, the fixed income options and various things are more steady, Eddie, but boring. Okay, so a lot less attention and information and media attention certainly just doesn't go there as much. So it's hard to find information on this, but this was a pretty good article, one of the better ones I've seen, with some major holes. And what I mean by it is the holes are some just key missing things. I'm going to share with you some more. But like they show talk about in this article, where it states, cash is an option you can take. And of course, cash has high liquidity, but it doesn't have much in the way of any kind of return. So that's, for any long period of time, cash is probably not the best way to go for most people. Certificates of deposit, or CDs, is another option where certainly it's safe, FDIC insured in most cases. But again, the returns with the interest rates the way they've been for the past decade and the Fed recently reducing them to zero, your interest rates on CDs these days is just not going to be all that great. And many CDs, by the way, have early withdrawal penalties on top of that. So that can be a tough option to get any kind of return. And bonds, they talk about the safety of treasuries. It states in the article, offers nearly nothing in return. Again, because the low interest rate environment of the Fed over this past decade has caused an extraordinarily low interest rate environment. And, the 10-year treasury, for example, recently, dropped below 1% return, which is a historical low, lowest ever in history. Again, it speaks to the level of fear that's out there that people are willing to move to a treasury and get less than 1% return. Again, safety's there and such. There's some liquidity there. But again, the returns are very subpar. They also in this article talk about preferred stocks and emerging market fixed income, which are both, subject to some level of market risk. In fact, even in the article, it says the risk volatility is still palatable, particularly when you're referring to the emerging market fixed income. And in the preferred stock side, it says if you increase the risk level, if you increase your returns, you increase your risk level, and you may want to increase your cash cushion, which kind of just defeats the purpose of having that fixed or safer option of the money growing. You see what I'm trying to say? So I don't know personally if those are the best fits. Some people, sure, but for a lot of people looking for that safety, the flight to safety, as we talk about, yet get some kind of return out of it, that kind of defeats the purpose there, and it's not necessarily what someone is looking for. The thing that frustrates me, and I find this with these articles so often, and I think it's the natural bias or focus on Wall Street and Wall Street solutions, is there's some glaring exceptions. And I'm not saying this is the only things out there. There's other options, but I find there's 3 here that are very commonly used and aren't even discussed or brought up at all in this article. And again, I'm not trying to pick on the article. I find overall it's pretty good, and I don't know if it was intended to be all-encompassing, but I find these exceptions, these glaring exceptions or omissions, if you will, often. It's quite often I find them. And there's 3 big ones that I want to bring to attention today. And the first one's real estate. And what I mean by that in real estate is long-term cash flow properties like rental property. That can certainly be a steady Eddie type of income that can support, a retirement portfolio. Now, is it a fit for everybody? No, because not everybody wants to be a landlord, basically. And you can hire management companies and things like that. But, it still comes with its own set of challenges and opportunities, of course, that is it may be a good fit for some people and for others, not so much. So you just got to consider your personality and what you want to do. But understand it's an option that's there and should be at least considered. And that's why I said I think it's a glaring exception or a glaring omission, I should say, in this article. A couple others that would probably fit more of the investment or investor type community happen to be your personal bank and some annuities with guaranteed income riders, guaranteed lifetime income riders. The personal bank I've talked about quite a bit on this show, and if you want more information on it, of course, contact us at yourpersonalbank.com. I've shared or listened to some of the previously recorded shows or reach out to us for more information. And I've shared in previous shows a number of times why I talk about the personal bank so much. It's a high cash value insurance contract. It's designed to maximize tax-favored cash growth. There is a death benefit involved. Okay. The thing is, though, it's the opposite of what the traditional use of life insurance is for most people. Most people want to maximize death benefit, minimize contributions. In other words, what's the least amount of premium I can pay for the biggest death benefit? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a death benefit protection tool, and it has a purpose, and there's many folks like myself who have death benefit protection needs, like for my family and my business. But your personal bank's not designed for that. That's not what its focus is, even though there is some of that there. It's designed to maximize cash, tax-favored cash, access to cash. Has some minimum guaranteed interest that isn't affected by the markets or the economy. It certainly could be considered a bond alternative, and it's something that folks should look at and consider. We're going to talk about this further in the next segment, so stay tuned.
For more information on your personal bank, call Ference at 866-515-6280 or online at yourpersonalbank.com. back to your personal bank show with president and founder of Secure Estate Management, Ferenc Toth.
With the markets, the economy, and the way things are going these days, we're talking about the fixed or safer bucket of money. What in the modern portfolio theory talks about, the rule of thumb, 60% equity, 40% bond, or bond-like alternatives. Lots of attention is given to the equities and the stock side. That's where the media pays bulk of their attention. It's the sexy side of things, if you will. Little attention is paid to the safer bucket, and partially probably because it's more boring. But that's the point of it. That's the purpose. You want it to be that more steady, Eddie, consistent, not affected by economy and markets so much, create a interest or gain or income for you to alleviate or mitigate risk. And that's the purpose of it. And, I've been referring to an article here. It's by CNBC in Personal Finance. It's with interest rates near zero, preserving retirement income gets risky. Talks about a various number of options of the fixed or guaranteed, but the safer, we'll put it this way, the safer side, the safer bucket of money. And this is important because, as I've referred to now several times, a recent Vanguard study is a great example of it. I see this quite often with clients personally also, but basically a recent study showed that over a large percentage of do-it-yourself investors had let their portfolio mix really get out of whack to what they were originally intending. In fact, they were pointing out the average bond allocation in that study was only 23%. They basically let the equities or the stocks run, and they did, and it worked great for a decade or so when the stocks were running. But certainly, I think we can all agree that has changed recently, and discipline is important now. Just about every article and financial advisor talks about this is, when these things happen, it's a good time to reassess, reallocate your portfolio, get back in line with what your risk tolerance is and where you should be. And so let's talk about that safer side. And again, this article talks about the different options that are out there, again, with a few glaring omissions that I'm going to share more on. They talk about cash, of course, cash being liquid, but little or no return. They talk about CDs being safe, of course, but again, little return, and some have penalties. They talk about bonds, particularly treasuries, certainly considered safer, but with little return, very low returns. We've hit historical lows recently with a 10-year treasury being below 1%, for example. They talk about preferred stocks. As you increase the rate of return, though, you typically increase the risk level, and it states in the article you want to increase your cash cushion, which kind of defeats the purpose of that safer side of the bucket, if you will. And then they talk about emerging market fixed income, which, again, certainly can offer higher returns, but again comes with greater risk. And like it says, the risk volatility is still palatable there. Again, sort of defeating the purpose of that safer bucket. So I would argue that maybe those last two options are not necessarily a great fit. I'm not saying for everybody, but certainly if that's your intention of that side, being safer, reducing risk, probably not the best fit. The omissions I've referred to, there's three. There's some others out there, but I think the three big ones, in my opinion, are rental real estate, long-term cash flow real estate can certainly accomplish a bond-like alternative or an income for you. Is not a great fit for some, not for everyone. Real estate, some people love it, others hate it. Depends on your personality and what you want to do with it. Do you want to be a landlord is what it boils down to. And then there's the personal bank, and there's some options in terms of with annuities with guaranteed lifetime income riders that can accomplish these things. Now, again, I want to say up front, some people, not so much anymore, but, I've been in this industry 22 years, and I remember the days when I would talk about an annuity, for example, and people would say, I've heard annuities are bad. And there's still a few folks, it's gotten to be much less, but there's still a few out there that say that annuities are bad. And again, if you've listened to the show at all, you've heard me say one of my pet peeves is, when people make blanket statements, this is good or that's bad, you should pay off all your debt, including your mortgage, or annuities are bad. Those kind of blanket statements are really nothing more than that person's personal bias. Now, that advice may be good for some people, and certainly is good for some people, but you can't apply that across the board. What I'm getting at here is, And again, the problem with this article, and again, I don't know if it was meant to be all-encompassing, but I find this so often, very common. The few articles I find on the safer side of things rarely, if ever, talk about anything outside of the Wall Street or maybe banking arenas like this one did. Talks about CDs. Everything else is sort of pretty much in the Wall Street arena, if you will. What about these other options like real estate? It should be considered. Now, is it a fit for you? Yes, no, maybe. I don't know. That's something we can discuss. If you want to contact me at yourpersonalbank.com, be happy to do so. But you should at least consider it and then decide. Make an informed decision is what I'm trying to say. A couple other options, again, that are not brought to attention are the Your Personal Bank. You know, Your Personal Bank, it's a high cash value insurance contract. It has a rider associated with it that's designed to increase the cash and the cash growth over, say, a traditional policy that has no rider. You know, in fact, most insurance contracts, frankly, are designed, most of them I look at, certainly, are designed basically to maximize death benefit protection. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, particularly if you have a death benefit protection need. You know, as I do, I have a family and business. I have some of those needs, and I've addressed those accordingly. And certainly if you have those needs, you should too. But if you're looking at a contract, or if you're looking at, you know, hey, I want to have some of my portfolio in a safer bucket and less subject or not subject to market risk, and I want to have a steady, consistent return or gains, if you will, a steady Eddie type of bucket of money, which is recommended, by the way, and these days brings it to light why that's so important. You know, Your Personal Bank can be a great financial tool for that. It has a guaranteed interest rate crediting rate. In other words, it's going to pay interest every single year. You know, the contractual guaranteed rate is 4%. The current rate is 5%. You know, this interest rate environment, that ain't bad. And when you consider it to some of these other things, like in these articles, these other options that are out there, you know, that do include some safety, like a personal bank does, you know, CDs and whatnot, you know, it can be very favorable, very competitive, if you will. Is it a fit for you? I can't say that unless we chat. But is it worth considering? Absolutely. It's certainly worth looking into and making an informed decision. And again, these are the times when people need to be looking at these things, reallocating their portfolio and their assets, and to make sure that, you know, what they want to accomplish in their goals and their money is in the right places to do those things. Because I think it's fair to say things have changed recently. And that's the time when you want to make those changes. I'm not saying, you know, take huge losses and various things like that. I'm talking about reallocating things, which is the advice given by most people, most articles, most experts. So I'm not going against anything anyone's really saying. All I'm saying is take a look at it, but look at all the options and all the variables that are out there in terms of what could be a good fit. And again, the personal bank, I need to keep going to that, but, you know, hey, this is the Your Personal Bank show, isn't it? And I've shared, if you've listened to previous shows, why do I talk about, do we do other things? Yeah, absolutely, other products. Why do I focus so much on this? And the reason is simple. I find, just like in this article, in most cases, it's just not information that's even shared or brought to a person's attention. So rarely is it that I felt like there's a vacuum of information, if you will, out there about this. So I'm trying to be that, you know, that voice in the wilderness, if you will, crying out and saying, hey, there's another option. Check it out. Take a look at it. And if it's a fit for you, great. And if not, at least you took you made an informed decision. And at least you know the reasons why or why not it was a fit for you. I think for a good portion of people certainly a good portion of the people I talk to, it turns out to be a good fit. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't think this will be a futile exercise or a waste of time in terms of taking a look, because it does fit the bill for so many people that I talk to. And with those needs to reallocate and such, it can be that bond alternative that you might be looking for that gets you a steady, consistent rate of return, or increase in value, the guaranteed crediting rate, if you will, interest rate, and not subject to the market risk. Stay tuned for the next segment. We're going to go into further how this can work for you and really benefit your overall portfolio.
For more information on your personal bank, call Ference at 866-515-6280 or online at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to Your Personal Bank Show with President and Founder of Secure Estate Management, Ference Toth.
Welcome back. We are talking a lot about the safer bucket, the bucket of money that in your portfolio that is supposed to be there, the bond or bond-like alternative that modern portfolio theory always talks about. Rule of thumb, 60% equity, 40% bonds or bond-like alternatives. That could be higher or lower depending on the person's situation, of course. But what about that? If I'm looking for a place to put my money and I want it to be not subject to market risk, I want it to generate a gain, I want it to, be steady, consistent growth, where can we put our money today? And that's kind of a tough question because of we've gone through a decade or more now of really low interest rate environment since 2008. I mean, if you put things in perspective, before the 2008-09 Great Recession started, the federal funds rate was at 5%. And interest rates on pretty much everything are directly or indirectly affected by the federal funds rate. Well, that rate dropped within a year to 1%. And even a month or so ago, it was still only at 1.5%. In other words, the Federal Reserve kept rates really low for the past decade or so. And they've recently dropped them to 0. So what does that do to your fixed income or your guaranteed assets, your safer assets, the bonds, all those different things that are bond alternatives, that safer money bucket? Well, like this article from CNBC talks about, with interest rates near 0, preserving retirement income gets risky. It gets tougher. And it talks about, cash is a safe alternative, but, again, little or no return on cash. Savings accounts don't pay much these days. CDs don't either. Bonds, treasuries, for example, don't either. The 10-year treasury recently hit on dropped below 1%, was an all-time low. So again, these safer money options have extremely low interest rates that they're earning or crediting, if you will. And then they talk about some other options in this article, like preferred stocks and emerging market fixed income. And as they point out, the problem is, of course, they involve additional risk, and then they recommend increasing your cash cushion as a result, which defeats the purpose of the safer money bucket. I've mentioned several times now that there's some glaring omissions here, in my opinion, because everything here is really focused around Wall Street or banks. What about cash flow real estate? That's an option. A rental real estate can create long-term cash flow. Is it a fit for everybody? No, not everybody wants to be a landlord, but it's certainly an option, and I think should at least be considered. The other options I've talked about in the last segment quite a bit was your personal bank. Your personal bank has a contractual guaranteed interest rate. It's credited, okay, annually. That happens to be 4% right now, and currently the rate's 5%. In today's interest rate environment, that's pretty darn good. And if you're going to have a consistent increase on your account because of that guaranteed interest crediting, that addresses a lot of those questions or concerns or problems that are what people are looking for. I just want my money to grow consistently, steady, Eddie, at least in that bucket, that portion of my monies. Okay? For those that are more conservative, they want a bigger percentage of their money there. That's fine. That's an individual decision. But the point is, where do you go to find those kinds of things? And the personal bank is one of them. All right? Let me throw another one at you. A lot of people have some funny opinions about annuities. But I'm going to put it out to you out there that it's become more mainstream and accepted over the past 10, 15 years. I was one of the pioneers in the index and in fixed index annuity world, which came out in 1995, the very first one. And starting about 97, 98, I think, I started selling them myself. And back then it was like, what is this? Okay, so I've been around this for a long time. I've been a top 10 producer in the country, multiple years, with the top 1 or 2 companies in the country. I've done a lot of that. And what's funny is, in the early days, it was considered, well, there was a lot of negative feedback from a lot of people who were competitors, frankly, in many ways. But now it's become mainstream and accepted. Well, one of the things that those types of products can do, and I've talked about this often, is one way of looking. You can. How do you reduce risk? Okay, and ensure you have enough money to live in retirement. I mean, the reality is, what are people looking for? They don't want to outlive their money, right? I mean, what it boils down to, in most cases, that's really, you don't want to live longer than your money. Okay, and I think that's a pretty common thing. So one way of doing that is calculate your expenses for retirement. You know, not all the, you know, what's your basics? You know, the food, housing, clothing. What are you going to know you're going to need? We can put a reasonable inflation factor on that, and we can calculate, and life expectancy and all those things, and we can calculate basically how much money you're going to need in retirement to cover the needs, the basics. And then you can set aside a chunk of money that will then, with a guaranteed lifetime income rider, that can guarantee that income out for the rest of your life. Okay? Whatever that number is. And here's what's interesting about that kind of financial tool, especially if you got a little bit of time ahead of you before you need that income. You know, you can set that money aside, and that guaranteed income can have what's called a roll-up rate. Right now, there's guaranteed roll-up rates of multiple companies of 7%. What does that mean? It means if you set that money aside each year, you defer it, it's going to increase by 7%, and then that is the amount of money, that's the number you'll have to calculate based on your age, it's an actuarial calculation, a monthly benefit or a monthly payout to you, guaranteed for life. So what's interesting about that option, that tool, is if you don't need that income for a few years, you can defer it for a while, 2, 3, 5, 10 years even, whatever. You can really, we all know the rule of, well, I shouldn't say this. Many people know the rule of 72. And if you, those that don't, the rule of 72 is quite simple. It just means if your money is growing at 7.2% interest annually, in 10 years, it doubles. Well, at a guaranteed 7% roll-up rate, that means your money is going to roughly double in 10 years, isn't it? Guaranteed. In terms of money available for income. Let me illustrate. Let's assume, for example, you put $100,000 into one of these financial tools with the guaranteed lifetime income rider. And you put 10 years later, you would have almost $200,000, wouldn't you? Available for income. And let's say you decide, you can turn your income on anytime you want. Typically, in most cases, after 30 days or a year, depends on the product and the tool. But if you waited 10 years, for example, you'd have close to $200,000. And based on your age, they would do an actuarial calculation that would determine how much money you could get. You would get paid monthly, guaranteed for the rest of your life, or jointly for you and your spouse. These are actuarial calculations. These are guaranteed numbers. There's no guesswork involved with this. So if you want to contact us, it's real simple. You say, look, if I put 100,000 or 2 or 3, whatever the number is, and I'm going to turn, and I'm this age, and I'm going to turn the income on at this point in time, we have the computer, boom, we can tell you how much your check's going to be. There's really no guesswork involved with it. And again, if you're thinking about that safer bucket, what about, does that fit the tool? Or fit the need? Does that tool fit the need in terms of a guaranteed income for retirement, for example? I think it does. And in many cases, it can be the solution that's a good fit for people, because here we go. You want a guaranteed certain amount of income for the rest of your life. And by the way, and there's a tool that'll do it for you right there. And 7% roll-up rate these days, again, ain't bad compared to the rates of return on fixed tools these days, financial tools. The thing is, you've accomplished what your goal was. I think it's one of those things that needs to be considered. It needs to be looked at, and if you want to look at it, again, contact us at yourpersonalbank.com. We'll run a comparison with just about every company that exists out there that offers this kind of tool. We'll show you the one that has the best numbers based on your age and the time frame that you want to take it out in. It's a mathematical calculation. It's really that simple, and it creates some certainty in your portfolio in terms of income down the road. And I think that is extremely valuable, particularly in a time with tremendous uncertainty. Stay tuned.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, call Ference at 866-515-6280 or online at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to Your Personal Bank Show with President and Founder of Secure Estate Management, Ference Toth.
Rounded third, welcome back. I've been talking a lot today about uncertainty. You know, we've had a lot of volatility in our markets of all types, just about. Just a lot of uncertainty about the coronavirus, particularly in terms of how impactful it's going to be. Well, I think most people recognize it's going to be quite impactful. I think that's pretty obvious. But the bigger question really is how long? And that's the real point of uncertainty. And depending on who you talk to and who you read, and you know, there's great degree of disagreement on that. And the reality is we just don't know until we're going to live through it and see what happens. And it'll get better. It'll blow over eventually, and there'll be pent up demand, and good economic times will come again. But what's the damage going to be in the meantime, and for how long? You know, are we in a correction, or are we in a recession? And that's unknown at this point. But I think it's wise to prepare, and again, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. That's just good business. That's good financial strategy, and that's just important. But I think I really hit on something in the last segment that's of valuable importance. You know, this is the time when these things happen that, you know, just about every advisor expert talks about. It's a good time to rebalance your portfolio. Things have changed. The markets have changed. You know, and so is your risk tolerance, your balance where it should be? You know, those kinds of things, and recalibrate, reallocate. And there's so much information on the equity stock side. I don't want to talk about that very much because there's so much there, but there's so little, I find, on that safer bucket, the bond or bond alternative side. And I've talked about this article several times now from CNBC talking about, you know, interest rates near zero, preserving retirement income's risky, and then going through several of the options out there, the safer money, the safer bucket, you know, with cash, you know, CDs both being, you know, cash being liquid with little return, CDs being safe with little return, bonds, particularly treasuries, considered safe but with little return, you know, and then they talk about some other options, you know, getting into the preferred stocks and emerging market that can give you better returns but higher risk. And then they recommend in there, right in the article, increase your cash cushion, which kind of defeats the point. So of that safer bucket. And so I've talked a lot about in this show about the omissions, of my opinion. And there's others, but the three big ones, you know, rental real estate can certainly create an income, but not everybody wants to be a landlord. You've got Your Personal Bank that has a guaranteed interest crediting rate. Currently it's 4% contractually, currently paying 5%. And, you know, with liquidity, tax favored. The liquidity, by the way, is in the 60 to 80% range, typically, with all the cases that I've worked with clients, and that's pretty normal. So you've got some safety involved, consistency, okay, and some liquidity with Your Personal Bank. And that can really accomplish a lot of things for people, what they're wanting in that safer bucket or that bond-like alternative. Your Personal Bank can certainly fit that. Another option I talked about was, you know, the guaranteed lifetime incomes. Riders with annuities. If you want to create a guaranteed income down the road, particularly, you can get a nice roll up. These days, several companies are still offering 7% if you defer that money each year and then turn on that income stream. So if you're going to put you want a guaranteed incomes a few years down the road, 2, 3, 5 years down the road, 10, you know, that can be a good option. Again, what I want people to do is get away from the preconceived notion of because it's named this or named that. When I talk about, your personal bank being a high cash value insurance contract, some people hear the word insurance and immediately stop listening because they're like, well, I don't want to do insurance. That's an expense, not an asset. Well, I can send you all kinds of information. Contact me, yourpersonalbank.com, showing life insurance as an asset class. It's gaining traction and interest. When I started talking about this 7 years ago, just about almost everybody I talked to had no concept or no introduction to this idea. Today, fortunately, and it's good news, I think hopefully partly because of this radio show and others, workshops and various things that I and others have done, the attention is starting to gain a little bit of traction. And what's exciting about it is these types of events, these kinds of economic events, cause people to wake up and pay attention and start considering and thinking about all their options, because maybe the ones they are doing now were working but aren't so much anymore. So if you're looking for those to create some certainty, how do you create some certainty in an economic situation full of uncertainty? And that's really what it boils down to. We can discuss and determine what's the right mix for you. How much of your bucket, how much of your money should be in that safer option? And then we can create some certainty in that safer bucket. We can create some certainty in terms of growth, crediting, interest crediting. How much is it going to grow each year? A steady eddy consistency there. We can create a guaranteed lifetime income. So we can say down the road, at a certain point, it's a mathematical calculation. It's dependent on how much you put in and your age. And when you start to take it out, we can determine with mathematical accuracy, look, this is how much you're going to get per month for the rest of your life, for example. That's how you create certainty and gain control back of your money in what is a very uncertain situation, and for a lot of people, very scary. It's often said, Wall Street is moved by fear and greed. Okay, I mean, the thing is, my wife, she's a post master's human behavior specialist, degrees and all this stuff, counseling, all these different things. And one thing she shares with me all the time is, for the person experiencing emotion, so let's use fear because that seems to be the predominant one right now. I mean, go to any grocery store or go to just about any store and try to find toilet paper these days, My joke, I think last week I shared, and to try to insert a little bit of humor in the situation, is maybe this will become known as the toilet paper correction or recession. I don't know. But anyway, but emotions are real for the person that's feeling them. Okay. And to deny that is to deny who we are as humans. So, all the articles, it's always talk about stay calm, relax, all these kinds of things. Well, for somebody that's genuinely feeling the emotion of fear or any other emotion for that matter, it's tough. It's tough to do so. And I was even reading some other articles talking about where, irregardless of what the experts say, if the markets drop 10%, or if their account drops 10%, I should say, they're out. Irregardless, about a third of people are said they're just out, irregardless of what the experts say. In other words, they're not going to listen to what we tell them. So if somebody is in a position where, irregardless of what anybody tells them, if their account drops by 10%, they're out, that's a good sign that maybe they're not in the right place. And that's just not the right risk tolerance for that person. And maybe they need a heavier position in the safer or accounts that are not correlated to market risk and give them that consistent, steady Eddie returns. We can do that for folks. And if you are wanting to gain control of your money and create some certainty, how do you take control of some of your dollars and some of your portfolio? We can do that for you. Contact us at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned every Tuesday at noon for the Your Personal Bank show on 1510 AM or 105.3 FM, or download the Your Personal Bank app. Love to talk to you. Stay tuned. We'll talk to you next week.
Listen next week at noon for more information on Your Personal Bank. Contact Ference at 866-515-6280 or online at yourpersonalbank.com.
Index annuities offer a fixed interest option and index interest options. Annuities with index options may be referred to as equity index annuities. The index options are not securities. You are not investing in stocks or in the indexes themselves. Credited interest does not include dividends paid by companies included in the relevant index. The credited index rate is linked, in part, to gains in any combination of indexes. You are not actually participating in the market or investing in any stock or bond. Index strategies may not be available in all states. Withdrawals may be taxable, and if taken prior to age 59 and a half, a 10% penalty tax may also apply.